If you've ever watched a tour professional swing with what looks like absolute zero effort, but they still somehow hit the ball 300 yards down the middle of the fairway, while you feel like you are swinging completely out of your shoes just to go half that distance, well, this deep dive is for you.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate physical illusion, isn't it?
It totally is.
Yeah.
And today we've got our hands on an elite-level biomechanics and high-performance sports science manual. We're specifically diving into the data from high-level movement analysis systems like StatsBox. So we are completely skipping the standard, driving range tips.
Really no quick fixes here.
Exactly. We want to decode the actual physics of how the human body generates force, speed, and power in the modern golf swing.
Because, like you said, it's an illusion. We watch these elite athletes on television, and our brains immediately tell us, oh, they must have incredibly strong arms and wrists to hit a golf ball that far.
Which makes sense logically, right?
It does, but it's the fundamental misunderstanding we have to clear up right away. Generating speed is not about raw muscular strength in your upper body. It's a highly sophisticated physical equation.
A completely different animal.
Exactly. We are looking at an intricate blend of ground reaction forces, advanced kinematics, and a level of precise timing that happens in literally fractions of a second.
Right, and to understand how that energy actually reaches the clubhead, we can't look at the hands. The manual is extremely clear on this point. We have to start, well, where the body meets the earth.
Yeah, everything begins with ground reaction forces, or GRF.
Yeah.
The ground is the primary energy source in the golf swing. Elite players don't swing with their arms at all, really.
They don't.
No, they create force from the ground up through highly specific pressure shift mechanics. When a golfer takes a swing, they are utilizing 3 distinct forces against the earth. You've got horizontal, vertical, and rotational forces.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second, because I was reading the section on force production, and my takeaway was that it's essentially like jumping on a trampoline, or like throwing a heavyweight punch.
Right.
The power doesn't originate in the fist or the club. It's created by pushing against the floor. Am I reading that right?
You're touching on the exact right idea, though there is a vital distinction to make here. A trampoline gives energy back to you passively, right? You just bounce.
Oh, sure.
But golf turf is rigid. You have to actively drive force into the ground to trigger Sir Isaac Newton's third law of motion.
For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction.
Exactly. If you want to move energy up into the kinetic chain, you have to push down and away from the earth. The manual shows this starts with trail-side loading.
So shifting weight back.
Well, shifting pressure, yes.
Yeah.
The golfer shifts pressure into their trail leg, gathering potential energy. But the magic really happens in the transition. We all know the transition is where the swing is made or broken. But the data shows elite players are actually shifting their pressure to their lead side before the club even finishes going back.
That slight lateral shift, I noticed that. But the manual emphasizes it's not just a slide forward, right? There's this massive spike in the data they call the brake effect.
Oh, the brake effect is fascinating.
It looks like the lead leg is actively trying to stop all that forward momentum, like hitting a wall.
That's the secret to rotational speed.
Yeah.
Imagine riding a bicycle at top speed and suddenly you just slam on the front brake.
You fly over the handlebar.
Exactly, because your forward momentum violently transfers upward and forward. In the golf swing, the lead leg acts as that front brake.
Wow.
Yeah, as the golfer shifts pressure to the lead side, they push vertically and horizontally against the ground to stop their lateral slide. The manual highlights a wild data point here. Average tour pros are generating over 200% of their body weight in vertical force during that braking phase.
200%. That's insane.
It's not just a little push. They're essentially trying to launch themselves off the planet. This massive braking force is what initiates vertical lift and, crucially, rotational torque.
So the pelvis violently clears out of the way precisely because that lead leg posted up and slammed the brakes.
Yes. The stopping creates the spinning.
That is wild to visualize. The direct relationship between planting that lead foot firmly and the resulting rotational speed makes total sense now.
And because that foot is planted, the energy has literally nowhere else to go but up the kinetic chain.
But, I mean, extracting that force from the ground is pretty much useless if the upper body just spins wildly with it, right?
Oh, completely useless.
Which leads us to how the body actually catches and multiplies that speed.
Yeah.
The sources refer to this as the kinematic sequence.
Right. The kinematic sequence is the defining difference between a touring professional and your average weekend amateur. It is a biomechanical chain reaction.
It happens in a very specific order, right?
Right. Yes, the ideal acceleration sequence in a golf swing happens in 5 perfectly timed steps. First, the pelvis fires. Second, the thorax, which is the rib cage and chest. Third, the arms. Fourth, the hands. And fifth, the club itself.
Okay, I see.
This is known in movement science as proximal to distal sequencing. Energy moves from the center of the body, the proximal segments, out to the farthest points, the distal segments.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me, because the math of how this speed builds up is staggering. The manual refers to this as segmental speed gains, or like late acceleration.
Right.
So this totally upends the gym bro logic of golf. You could have a massive bodybuilder on the tee box, but if they don't sequence this properly, the manual says they just bleed all that potential energy out.
They do.
So they have raw strength, but absolutely no speed.
That happens constantly. A player with massive muscular strength tries to muscle the ball from the top using just their arms and shoulder complex. But because their pelvis and chest haven't initiated the sequence, they experience massive energy leaks.
Or if they fire their wrist too early.
Right. Exactly. The speed never multiplies. To understand how speed actually multiplies, you have to look at how a whip works. To make the tip of a whip break the sand barrier, you don't just swing the handle forward as fast as you can.
No, you pull it back.
You pull the handle forward and then violently snap it back. You decelerate it.
Deceleration to accelerate.
Precisely. In the golf swing, the pelvis rotates at high speed, then rapidly decelerates. That sudden deceleration literally cracks the whip, transferring all that kinetic energy into the thorax.
And then the thorax does the same thing.
Exactly. The thorax rotates, then decelerates, passing the multiplied energy to the arms, and so on. The wrists maintain their hinge, storing that angular velocity until the very last millisecond.
When the arms decelerate.
Right. The arms decelerate, and all that stored force violently releases through the clubhead.
And the pros are utilizing the core to bridge those segments, aren't they? The manual talks extensively about the X factor and the X factor stretch.
Yeah, so the X factor is the separation between the pelvis and the thorax. As the pelvis starts rotating toward the target in the early downswing, the thorax is actually still turning back.
Or at least staying completely coiled.
Right. This creates massive separation, stretching the core muscles like a heavy rubber band. This invokes what we call the stretch-shortening cycle of the muscles.
Which means what exactly?
When a muscle is rapidly stretched before it contracts, it fires back with significantly more elastic energy. Timing that lag and release will always trump brute force.
But executing this perfect whip sequence sounds incredibly demanding on the human anatomy. I mean, it requires specific body parts to move freely in three-dimensional space, while other parts have to act as rigid anchors.
It does. It requires a strict joint-by-joint approach. Our biomechanics dictate that certain joints are designed for massive rotational mechanics, side bend, flexion, and extension.
And others aren't.
Exactly. Others are built purely for stability. For a highly efficient sequence, you need incredible mobility in specific areas. Your T-spine, which is your thoracic spine or mid-back of front, your hip internal rotation, and your neck mobility.
So you can keep your head relatively steady while your shoulders turn fully under it.
You've got it.
So what does this all mean for the average weekend player? Because, I mean, if I look at my own posture after sitting at a desk all week, my T-spine mobility is essentially non-existent.
Sure, most people's are.
Are amateur bodies just structurally doomed to lower back pain? Because we don't have the hip internal rotation of a 22-year-old tour pro.
Well, you aren't doomed, but you are identifying exactly why lower back pain is the #1 injury in amateur golf. The lumbar spine, your lower back, is built for stability, not rotation.
Oh, really?
Yeah, anatomically, it only has about 10 to 15 degrees of rotational capacity. Think about that. If a weekend player has tight hips and a stiff mid-back, their brain still wants to hit the ball 250 yards.
So they have to get the turn from somewhere.
Exactly. So they force the rotation into the one place that shouldn't rotate, the lumbar spine.
Creating mobility where there shouldn't be any.
And that creates massive side bend stress and shear forces on the vertebrae. Mobility without stability is the absolute danger zone.
Yikes.
While the T-spine and hips need to move dynamically, you desperately need pelvic stability, core stability, and shoulder stability to control those forces.
Right.
If you lack stability, your body will try to find it somewhere else, usually compensating in joints that just aren't designed to handle those loads.
And this is where the manual really shifts gears. Because to safely navigate those physical limitations and fix these energy leaks, elite coaches aren't just, eyeballing a player's swing on a driving range anymore.
No, the days of just guessing from a video are over.
They're using advanced 3D motion analysis.
Hmm.
It sounds like we've stopped treating the golf swing like an art project and started treating the human body like a Formula One car in a wind tunnel.
That's a perfect analogy. The technological leap is staggering. We're talking about medical-grade 3D motion capture and systems that track 6 degrees of freedom or 6 DOF.
Which means tracking movement in every possible direction, right?
Yeah, up, down, left, right, forward, backward, plus the rotation on all those axes. Systems like StatsBox measure exactly what a player's pelvis, rib cage, arms, and club are doing in three-dimensional space at hundreds of frames per second.
What's wild to me is the granularity of this telemetry. They aren't just looking at video to see if the swing, looks smooth.
Mm-hmm.
The data tracks pelvic sway, vertical lift, thrust toward the ball, side bend angles. I read the section on pelvic thrust, and that alone was a total light bulb moment for me.
Oh, it's a perfect example. So thrust measures how far the pelvis moves toward the golf ball during the downswing.
Also known as early extension, right?
Right. The 3D data shows that if an amateur's pelvis moves even 2 inches toward the ball, they completely lose the physical space required to swing their arms from the inside.
Wow. 2 inches.
Just 2 inches. Their brain subconsciously realizes the arm's going to crash into the body, so it stalls the body's rotation, forcing the hands to flip at the last second just to make contact.
Which completely destroys the kinematic sequence we just talked about.
Completely destroys it.
Speaking of which, the manual talks about how these systems generate kinematic sequence graphs. If I look at my own 3D graph, I'm pretty sure it just looks like the flat line of a wet noodle.
Probably.
Whereas a pro's graph looks like a heartbeat monitor during a horror movie. Everything is spiking violently at the exact right millisecond.
That heartbeat monitor analogy is incredibly accurate. On a 3D graph, you can visually see the whip cracking. You see the exact rotational speeds of the pelvis, chest, arms, and club.
You can see the deceleration.
Yes, you see the peak angular velocity of each segment and precisely when it rapidly decelerates to transfer energy. By mapping this elastic energy and the stretch reflex, coaches compare an amateur's movement patterns to the typical values seen in PG Tour professionals.
So they know exactly what's wrong.
Exactly. If a player is losing clubhead speed, the 3D data tells us the exact biomechanical failure point. We don't have to guess if their hips were too slow. The math shows us their pelvis didn't decelerate fast enough, meaning the energy never transferred up to the chest.
But knowing the data is one thing. Actually reprogramming the human nervous system to swing differently is a completely different challenge.
It's the hardest part of coaching.
I saw this section on overspeed training where players swing these incredibly light shafts as fast as humanly possible. My takeaway was that this isn't about building muscle at all, but more like tricking your neurological governor, like convincing your brain it's physically safe to swing at 120 miles an hour. Is that right?
That is the exact mechanism. Overspeed training is where movement science meets motor learning. Your brain has a subconscious governor that limits your rotational speed to protect your joints.
Makes sense. It doesn't want you to rip your own spine apart.
Right. So by swinging a club that is significantly lighter than standard, you force the nervous system to fire faster, increasing the peak angular velocity. Over time, the brain basically resets its speed threshold.
That is so cool.
But that's just one tool.
Right. The manual outlines an entire matrix of speed and power development.
Yeah. Once the 3D analysis identifies the specific inefficiency, coaches design highly targeted programs. If the data shows poor stretch-shortening cycle utilization, meaning you aren't getting that rubber band snap between the pelvis and thorax, a coach might prescribe rotational medicine ball drills.
How does that help?
Throwing a heavy medicine ball against a wall mimics that proximal to distal sequencing.
Yeah.
It physically forces the body to use ground reaction forces in the core to generate momentum, rather than just, throwing the arms at it.
You can't just arm through a heavy med ball.
Exactly. They also use specific ground force drills to teach that horizontal pressure shift and targeted mobility protocols to free up the T-spine and internal hip rotation we talked about earlier.
Okay, hold on. Let me jump in here because I'm spotting a major contradiction in the source material. Yeah. Earlier, we laid out the ideal 5-step kinematic sequence. Pelvis, thorax, arms, hands, club. It sounded like an absolute universal law of physics.
It is.
But in the coaching application section, the manual emphasizes concepts like bioswing dynamics. It states that every golfer requires a highly individualized movement pattern. So which is it? Is it a universal formula or is it completely customized?
Okay. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is, well, it's both.
Both?
Yes. The physics of speed generation are universal laws. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kinematic sequence, the transfer of energy through deceleration, the generation of torque, that is how maximum clubhead speed is generated on planet Earth. You cannot violate the physics.
Okay, I follow you.
However, the method a human being uses to achieve that sequence must be highly individualized because no two humans have the same anatomy.
Ah, so the destination is exactly the same, but the road you take depends entirely on your specific physical vehicle.
That's a great way to frame it. Research in bioswing dynamics shows that players naturally fall into different core patterns based on their proportions and natural movement tendencies. You have upper core, middle core, and lower core players.
How does that actually change the swing?
Well, an upper core player, for example, typically relies much more on vertical ground reaction forces. They might have a more upright posture, a different hinge pattern in their wrists, and a release style that utilizes more arm rotation to square the face.
Okay, and a lower core player.
A lower core player might rely heavily on massive rotational forces and aggressive horizontal pressure shifts, clearing their pelvis much earlier in the downswing.
But they both end up at the same sequence.
Exactly. Both players can achieve a flawless kinematic sequence on a 3D graph, but they look entirely different doing it. Depending on an individual's anatomy and mobility limitations, a coach uses the 3D telemetry to build a custom blueprint.
So they optimize the swing for that specific body.
Right, so it can obey the universal laws of force and speed without causing injury.
Wow. So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? Let's summarize the core insights from this deep dive.
Let's do it.
First, real athletic power does not come from your hands or arms. It originates at ground zero through ground reaction forces, utilizing that massive braking effect to create rotational torque.
Spot on.
Second, sequencing and timing will always beat raw gym muscle. You have to decelerate your body segments to crack the whip and transfer energy up the chain.
Proximal to distal.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Third, maintaining a balance of joint mobility and core stability is the only way to protect your lumbar spine from injury.
Don't rotate where you shouldn't rotate.
Right. And finally, advanced 3D telemetry systems like StatsBox remove the guesswork, proving that while the physics of speed are universal, the way your specific body achieves them must be entirely your own.
It really takes the art of the golf swing and backs it up with undeniable science. But, understanding the data doesn't make the athletic achievement any less impressive.
If anything, it makes it more impressive.
Where?
Well, before we go, we always like to leave you with one final thought to mull over.
Next time you watch a golf tournament on TV, try a completely different perspective. Don't look at the club head. Don't even watch the ball fly. Watch the player's feet.
Just the feet.
Just the feet. Watch that split-second pause in their hips at the exact top of the swing where they shift their pressure. Think about the invisible forces moving from the earth, pushing up through their skeleton and snapping violently into the ball. It really makes you wonder, what other complex physical skills in your daily life are you completely misunderstanding because you're focusing entirely on the end result instead of the foundation?
A great question to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time.